3PNR with Adam R. Welcome to 3PNR. I'm your host, Adam R., and joining me for this episode again is Dr. Wilbur Allen. Dr. Allen, how you doing?
I'm very well, thank you.
Glad to have you on. Glad to have your time. Let's open up with this disclosure, this Congress meeting, whatever it was. What do you think of that?
I think that they were dismissive, even with the data that the Navy presented. There are congressmen that simply do not believe that material. And people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, for example, that indicated that he thought that the gimbal footage from the F-18s of the USS Nimitz were camera glitches. So that gives you an idea of the kind of mindset there is of the material that they put out right now. There are people that do believe it, and there's people that don't. And it's interesting that most of the congressmen have been dismissive of that information. You know, it's kind of odd because they're I'm sure expecting these craft to look like spacecraft from Star Wars or, you know, the day the Earth stood still, but they're far from what people expect them to look like.
Right.
So we know that is for a fact.
Yeah, I had this conversation with Chris DePerno last night from MUFON, and we were going in detail about how, 2 decades ago, maybe longer, Bob Lazar described these craft, and long before the gimbal video, and said that they would belly first go in the direction that they're going to go. And then you fast forward to the gimbal video, and that's exactly how it performed, to the T of how he described it.
But we have people that don't believe that. Regardless of the fact you present the information in front of them, they're not going to be receptive to that which is unknown. And we're showing them things that are unknown. And especially the gimbal footage from the F-18s of the USS Nimitz. But, we also have to consider the materials they did put out are monochromatic infrared, forward-looking infrared, and the definition and details associated to that footage aren't quite what they should be, but they did at least release something to give people an indicator of the objects that have been captured by the United States Navy.
Agreed. Neil deGrasse Tyson, I did hear him on a number of times kind of downplay the ufology. And if he's trying to take the gimbal video and some of the videos that our government has presented, and then, kind of discredit these pilots as you're not telling, you can't mean to tell me David Fravor made that shit up. There's no way.
But that's what Neil deGrasse Tyson did. He dismissed the material. He said, in fact, that the gimbal footage could have possibly have been glitches in the camera's technology.
That's insane.
Now, wait a minute. We've got 3 different aircraft or 4 different aircraft, all recording the same anomalous object, and all the footage from each aircraft looked essentially the same. So what he's saying then all these aircraft had camera glitches.
Yeah, and not to mention, it's insulting to the pilots. These are the best of the best.
Absolutely. His mindset is not necessarily one that is conducive for the belief of extraterrestrial objects. I do research, and I've been doing this research since 2010, and the data that I've been able to compile since 2010 has been uniform and consistent. I sent Dr. Tyson some samples, and he immediately unfriended me on the social network called LinkedIn.
Right.
I thought that was kind of odd because at the point that he dismissed me, he was basically dismissing all the materials people had been submitting as UFO footage and claiming that they're not UFOs.
Yeah, it's not very scientific to dismiss something because you don't 1000% agree with it. Part of science is researching. And again, like I say to a lot of people, if you want to say they're not real, do the same thing you're telling the people that are trying to say they are. If you're going to go out there and do the work to prove it, they should also go out there and do the work to disprove it. And I think they would find themselves in a position where they would admittedly become, not to say a believer, but they would come to an understanding. Something is definitely out there. But we cannot
question that for
it.
Sure. We know that for sure. But Dr. Tyson is not an individual that goes out and do individual and specific research associated to these objects. He's basically speaking from I would believe, opinion. And in his opinion is incorrect. The data is specific that I'm generating in high definition 4K is rather unique. It's definitely definitive. And this man dismissed that data.
That's again, that's not very scientific of him, you know.
Not at all. Not at all.
A scientist, I think people have this misconception of scientists. They think because they're a scientist, whatever they say is fact or law. The truth be told, everything we once upon a time knew for certain is no longer certain. Things we think are once upon a time we said were not possible, they're very much possible now. Today's science, and I say this a lot, today's science came from yesterday's hypothesis or theory, and that came from a child's imagination. That's how it works, you know?
Well, that is exactly how it works. You know, when the U.S. Navy released their materials, to me, it was the basis of research. And based on their materials, and based on the materials my technology is capturing, that what we are seeing is one and the same. The differences are, of course, I'm filming in full color infrared and in 4K, while in 2014, the technology at best was 780p or 720p in terms of high definition capabilities.
Yeah.
So we now have a difference in technology, and the difference in technology being higher resolution and higher definition, but showing the exact same objects documented by the USS Nimitz in a more definitive manner.
It makes me wonder. Look, eventually, and I said this a lot, eventually, private industries go into space, and we all know, and I said this to Chris, and I said this a lot in this podcast, eventually a Jeff Bezos is going to see something with some celebrities on board, because this guy's bringing celebrities up there, right? This isn't regular people. And eventually, something's going to be seen by a celebrity, and that's going to go viral. They're not going to be able to control that content from getting out there. And I'm dying to see how they're going to explain it or contain it, right?
You know, their spacecraft, the private industry spacecraft, are not necessarily designed for scientific exploration. They're designed to go from point A to point B as a vehicle. Now, I would personally design my spacecraft to do high definition scans and spatial scans specific to the regions of space that this particular spacecraft is entering into. And it would allow me to accumulate and gather information based on the area in which the spacecraft is in space.
Right.
But they're not looking to do space exploration. They're basically looking to get the astronauts from the ground to the space station and back. Those spacecraft are not designed for exploratory technology.
Right. Yeah, I think the only real thing that's going to come from that, because that's a billionaires club, right? And it's not even about research or science. Or like who could do better faster, right?
It's about a ride. They get a ride, then they have the capability to go into space, which, you know, inevitably was going to happen.
They're going to run into something. Period.
They are definitely going to run into something. But the problem is this, and my research is based specifically on objects that are in invisibility. So we're looking at objects that are beyond the range of human visibility, and that my camera technology is documenting these objects clearly. So if they're invisible and they're outside the spacecraft and a human being can't see them, how are we going to know they're even there?
That's a good point. It's all comes down to perception, you know?
Exactly.
And it's so the things that you're working on, inventive, right? And obviously don't say what here, because we don't need people trying to take the idea and run with it. But the cameras that you want to come with and create with better resources, I might add, would give us a better perception of these objects. In other words, it would help us to identify and spot them.
Exactly. And that is indeed what my camera technology is doing. But you have to understand, the camera technology that I utilize is not specifically designed for infrared technology, for infrared scanning.
Right.
And I had to augment my technology. But the simple fact is that these cameras that I'm using are extreme cameras. They don't need light technically to take a photograph in the real light spectrum. So I'm looking at infrared and the invisibility spectrum at a higher level than what would normally be scanned by, say, NASA Hubble, for example, or the James Webb Telescope, which is not necessarily a high definition application. So we know for a fact that what these objects are and what they are doing cannot be seen by humans. We know that for a fact because I'm looking at the technology that I'm using, and the technology that I'm using is 400,000 times greater in sensitivity than the human eye. So at 400 times greater the sensitivity of the human eye, what does one expect to see? And indeed, with the tech that I've created, we are seeing things that would not be perceivable by conventional technology.
It's going to take a large group to get behind you to give you the proper resources. So whoever listens to that, I suggest they get on board. Not because let's get outside the imaginary part, right? Let's say it sounds fantastic and this equipment that you're creating is going to be, a game changer. They should more or less look at it as it'll become the item that investigators must carry, and not just for ufology.
The standards in research.
Right. I mean, you're talking military applications.
Beyond military applications, because the military is not necessarily technologically astute in terms of its visual scan technology. You have to keep in mind, military grade FLIR, for example, at best is 25,000 ISO sensitivity, while the cameras that I'm using are 4 million ISO sensitivity. So we have a substantial difference in light gathering technology here, because a camera with 4 million ISO capability can see a lot more and a lot less light than conventional technology would ever in its existence be able to see.
Right.
So with that in mind, I went into extreme invisibility. And extreme invisibility are regions definitely where humans cannot see. And in these regions where humans cannot see, I'm getting a plethora of data indicating without a doubt that extraterrestrials are indeed in our airspace.
Well, for me, I try to base things like how humanity would do it. Like, in other words, if I were the alien, I said this with you and a few other people in the past, I would definitely observe, and I wouldn't want to be known being observed, right? Other than when I want you to observe me, observing you, right? It's a study. And for a hybrid program, and I've spoken to a lot of people about this, if humanity came across a planet where there was breathable air, not to us, but to the species there, it would take a very long time to create a hybrid to walk amongst these people, or for us to be able to breathe that air. This is not something that happens in one generation.
Not at all. They would have to have a completely different anatomical structure in order to be able to deal with the physical parameters associated with Earth. What's interesting, and let's mention the possibility, and this is strictly a possibility, that Jesus was an extraterrestrial. And he came from a planet in which the entities or beings looked like us, but their atomic structure is completely different, for the fact that where they come from, the gravity and the air density could be completely different. Hence, that's why they have superpowers when they come to this planet.
It makes sense. I mean, listen, there's a lot of pushback. Like, why do aliens have to be bipedal? Why do aliens have arms and head? Why are they kind of structured humanoid like us? I mean, I'll tell you why. If you look in nature, something that works well, it's replicated time and time again. Look at the cosmic web, then look at the spider web. It's got a very similar design.
Exactly.
So if it's not broken, why fix it? Nature knows best, right? Science, we want to use science to intervene and perhaps make something work for us better. Like an example would be fruits and vegetables on planet Earth. Right now, thousands of years ago, they were not that way. We manipulated that to to work for us better. So
well, they claim it works for us better, but bioengineered food is not necessarily better for us. For example, to bioengineer a fruit so that it doesn't decompose as quickly as it does under normal conditions would indicate that it would also be harder for the human body to digest.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why when people say, well, I don't believe in abduction, it makes no sense. We abduct all the time. We abduct animals for study. We abduct plants for study. We abduct humans for study. Let's be honest. You know what I mean? So if now imagine a much more sophisticated, advanced species here observing us, and they have to do a study in regards of our behaviors. And then also they want a hybrid program to go along with this, which a lot of the abduction stories over the years, when I hear this, sounds like science fiction until you figure out what mankind does in a laboratory. And then it makes sense.
Well, we did that with genetically engineered and modified generic viruses, like COVID, for example. This is generic. COVID is everywhere. It's not necessarily a viral for a life-threatening virus,
Right.
because it exists everywhere, and our bodies do generate antibodies associated to them. But they modified it, and in modifying it, it made it in such a way that those who did have immunity to it are no longer immune because of the modifications in the structure of the virus itself.
Right. Like to your point, if you look at what carrots were a long time ago, I was looking at images, what carrots were compared to today. They were not orange by any means, and they decompose differently, and you digest them differently.
Exactly.
And by doing that, there's probably the carrots from a long time ago were probably more nutritious. They would give you more minerals and vitamins than what today would.
Well, that was Bill Gates' agenda, to genetically modify foods. For example, the baby food shortage that's out there, the
oh yeah, I was hearing
formula
about that.
shortage. And here's Bill Gates, who has synthesized synthetic formula in replacement of it. So they've created this need for something that actually there's no shortage. What they've done, they shut off the supply. This is intentionally done. It is all intentional.
This should scare people, by the way. When a guy,
we're being manipulated by billionaires.
Yeah, I mean this guy came from software. How the hell is he getting involved with baby formula and food genetics? You know, and then he's talking about, what was that other thing he discussed about? Maybe blotting out the sun to cool down the planet. Like,
that man is a high school graduate, and there's nothing wrong with being a high school graduate, but he's not a doctor.
Right.
And here he is being presented by the media as a person of scientific interest, a person that knows this field, which is impossible because he doesn't have the degree to associate with it.
Right.
So without the degree, how can a person be taken seriously? But in Bill Gates' case, he's taken seriously for the fact that he has a plethora of money. So money talks and BS walks. That's the entire basis of this entire discussion.
That's the truth, man. And it should frighten people. This guy works with software, and all of a sudden he's trying to replicate formula. That bothers me to hear that. That's like
it's a setup, all of it. Just like COVID was a setup. His setup is to sell he creates the virus and then he sells you the antivirus.
Yep.
He creates the shortage, then he sells you a substitute.
Yeah, it's bothersome because I don't typically subscribe to controversy, but when I see a pattern, you have to recognize the pattern, and the pattern's holding true. So it bugs me to see like people like him. And I'm not saying he's a bad guy, but when I hear, again, a software guy discussing how to cool a planet down by clouding the earth to cool a planet, and then he's coming up with the solution to baby formula.
But hold it. He's not a software guy. He did not create Windows. He bought Windows from another engineer and paid that engineer $800.
It bothers me more now.
He did not develop it.
Yeah,
he is not a software genius. He's a salesman.
They say at some point for you to be a successful anything in the world, right? Like to be a CEO or someone of power, you have to be a psychopath at some level.
And he is indeed a psychopath, but he's an uneducated psychopath with a lot of money.
I don't know. That bugs me, man. So moving back into this disclosure, and I was talking to, again, Chris Tuperno about this. Not only were they dismissive, but it would appear to me that they were not only trying to like acknowledge it, but at the same time of acknowledging it, they were very nonchalantly debunking it.
What's interesting is when they made the initial presentation, the United States Navy did deliver samples to Congress, and the congressmen and senators that looked at material didn't necessarily believe it.
Yeah.
You have to think about that. So the problem does not necessarily have to be the materials that are presented, but the person that the material is presented to and their ability to comprehend what they're seeing. And then a lot of people, they don't want to believe that this stuff is real. So if they don't believe it's real from the beginning, you can take a horse to the water, but you can't make them drink. No matter how much data you present to them, they're not going to believe it.
Yeah, there was one guy, Mr. Gallagher is how they titled him, by the way. I got the sense he was pushing for facts, and he seemed to be the one they were shutting down the most. Like they didn't really entertain too many of his questions, and then if they did, it was more along the lines like, well, we'll discuss this in a closed session.
Well, I reached out to Congressman Carson, and I did not get a response back. And the materials I sent to the congressman were proof positive that the data that the U.S. Navy presented were indeed extraterrestrial organisms.
Yeah. How much, in your opinion, how much of like this, and I said this last night, and I say this a lot, we can't be fully transparent with the public because, let's be honest, people are crazy. There's still going to be these organized groups from either be religious or whatever facet that they have this strong belief system in, and they're going to turn around and see aliens as like, we don't even like us. We're still racist amongst us. And there's going to be, so there's these people, like, if an alien showed up to that Congress hearing, said, look, we're real. We're not going to we mean you no harm. We're here for a study. There's still going to be people in America like, that's a devil.
Well, wait a minute. They're just saying that they're not going to do anything until the objects land in the White House lawn.
Right.
And I've got samples from 2002 in which an extraterrestrial object had landed on the roof of the U.S. Capitol building, also on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol building. And when I presented the data to the news media, it was dismissed.
You're not the first person to mention that to me, by the way. I've heard this where something took place around 2002, and who was he? I can't remember the other person, but it was, I didn't hear it in the news, and it was almost like they swept it away.
Totally dismissed. But the interesting thing is that when I presented my material to the U.S. Capitol Police, is that the time that I took those anomalous photographs of the objects that were on the roof of the Capitol building, on the grounds of the Capitol, that there were U.S. Capitol Police officers that also witnessed that. And they made those reports, but those reports didn't go any further than that.
Are you familiar with the Mandela effect?
Yes.
So maybe because I was a kid, but I was a kid. And I remember hearing in the news that something, and this is like prior to the Phoenix lights, right? This is prior to that. I was a kid. And I remember in the news saying, oh, strange objects in Arizona, or not Arizona, not Arizona, Nevada. Strange objects in Nevada recorded, and it was this big deal in the news. And I never heard a word of it again. And then later on, some 10 years ago, or back when the 2017 videos came out, I was like, out of curiosity, like you see something and it jogs your memory. So I went to look that up, and I couldn't find anything anywhere. I would distinctly remember they're saying something. And I mean, the news people in the news were being, obviously, they would smile and smirk, a little dismissive, but the idea is it was reported. And I can't seem to find that anywhere, that report.
They happen to have and make things disappear that they're feeling the public and society should not know about. And they make those things disappear, and they make them go silent.
Yeah, I mean, especially prior to today. Like today, something goes viral. It's really hard to suppress something once it's viral because it gets shared so much. It's hard to erase its core data. So from then, yeah, so as a kid, so then I researched this. I do a little research to figure out. And then, of course, the Phoenix lights pop up. And the closest I found to that were somewhere, I don't recall it now. I mean, that's why I'm struggling with it. It was so long ago, but someone recorded this, turned it into the news station, became a big deal, and then gone. Nothing about it. And so when I hear people tell me things like in 2002 and something was spotted here, like I don't have doubts in that because I'm like, well, where are some of the things I remember hearing about? Why are they not being spoken about more publicly? Why is Bob Lazar not being given credit for, decades prior to a gimbal video describing to the T how they would operate? They would rotate. He said it years ago. They rotate belly first, go to the direction they want to go in. And then there's this video where you see this gimbal rotate and go to the direction it wants to go in against the wind. Like you hear the pilot say it's going against the wind. I mean, like, how is this? Why is that not being brought to attention?
But you have a problem with that material for the fact that there will be people that will dismiss it and claim that it is something else. There was a sample that was taken by the United States Navy, and it showed this. I don't know if you've ever seen these inflatable Batman balloons that they sell on Amazon.
I do. I remember those.
And they had this object, which was imaged by this F-18, and it was at about 50,000 feet. And it showed this thing clearly. Now, here's the problem. What child's balloon do you know of that has the capability of going to 50,000, 60,000 feet?
I don't think any.
They don't. It's impossible.
Right.
It's impossible.
That's why our military balloons, right? They're the materials used by that are thicker, and then they have their own. Yes, there's no way.
Exactly. So it's not going to be a child's balloon that we're looking at when we see this data that's filmed by the United States military. And then the problem again becomes the fact that it has similarities to that which is on Amazon and a child's balloon, but they're not looking at the realities. The realities are a child's balloon does not have the buoyancy to take that type of altitude and manifest itself in flight. It is impossible.
Right.
Impossible. Secondly, even more absurd, is that a child's balloon would not be registerable in radar. And these things came up on radar.
Yeah,
so wait a minute.
It lacks density, right?
Exactly. You can't use radar on a balloon because there's nothing for it to pick up. There's no density for it. There's nothing for it to send a signal back. So there are people that believe that what they're looking at are these conventional objects. So they try to give it a conventional explanation. And when somebody makes the statement, oh, it was a child's balloon from Amazon, and people believe it, that's the end of the story.
That's
and
crazy.
That's generally what happens.
You know, I got to tell you, man, if I was sitting down with Neil deGrasse Tyson, or anyone for that matter, and I can't argue video footage and artifact, I don't know enough about it, but what I can tell you is when I'm hearing pilots excited because these are trained observers, best of the best to fly these planes, it's insulting to them to say that it's anything other than what they said. And and on the video, you could hear one of the guys saying, you know, oh, look at the radar. There's a ton more on the radar that we're not seeing. They're just locked in that one object.
They had it on radar, but see, that's where Dr. Tyson failed in his assertion that it was a camera glitch. Because if it's a camera glitch,
right,
then what was registered on radar? So there's too many other fail-safe narratives that are associated with that.
I agree, yeah, because that's in concert. There's essentially three scanners. There's the heads up scanner that had radar, and then the visual, and then the pilot's eyes.
Exactly. And they dismissed the pilot's narratives. And that is insulting. It is totally insulting. It was one thing to say that was a camera glitch, but how do you explain excuse me, a camera glitch on 4 different aircraft, all showing the same thing?
Yeah,
how do you explain that?
It's insulting to even say that. That's just somebody that is no better than the religious person who says God made here and here only. That's no better than that. That's not scientific at all. If you're any kind of scientist, you see these videos, your job's not to analyze and say, well, that's horseshit because it is. Your job's to figure out what that is, period. You're a scientist. You're supposed to investigate and look into it. And if you don't, and there's no harm in a scientist saying, well, you know, I'm just not interested. Okay, I'm fine with that. But if you're not interested, don't put a negative spin on it then. Have nothing to say.
Dr. Tyson put his personal opinions associated to it, and his personal disbeliefs aren't necessarily consistent with the realities of the data. Yeah. So we're dealing with people here that they want to see and believe one thing and dismiss it if it isn't what they think it is supposed to be. While the realities are that these objects that the United States Navy documented were indeed extraterrestrial objects, without a doubt.
Yeah, and you know what? I watched David Fravor on Joe Rogan, and how unfortunate is it for people that, for me anyway, this is the unfortunate part for me. If I ever want to get news, I actually have to go to Joe Rogan and hear his opinions on it because I can't trust the news. Isn't that crazy to say?
The news is biased. It doesn't want to give you the full narrative.
Right.
Just like they're doing with this COVID. You know, it's interesting. Again, and I hate to keep bringing it up, but they'll make a report. For example, I was in an area in Virginia in which the news reported to be a hotspot, while at the hospital there wasn't a person in line being treated. So if it's a hotspot, where are the sick people? The media makes that happen, not the realities of things. So you can't necessarily go by what CNN or NBC News broadcasts because there's no actual facts associated to it. They create the narrative.
Well, we're seeing that play out with Ukraine, right? You hear one news station and another news station, a European news station, the Russian news station. There's never the same story. So
you're not going to get the same angle.
Right.
So, you know, they only want you to believe what they want you to believe. And that's the job of news media. The job of news media is to persuade you. Not necessarily to inform you, but persuade you.
And to the point, that's like what I'm saying. I was watching Joe Rogan with David Fravor, and David Fravor, you could see this guy. Look, to hear scientists debunk and say what they're saying, and you hear this guy speak, if you're calling that guy a liar, you're an asshole. That guy's a trade Top Gun pilot, a trained observer, and his takeaway from it is it was more sophisticated, and also he would like to fly something. He goes, if it's ours, I would love to fly it. You know what I mean? Like you could see the sincerity in his face. He spoke with contrition, and to hear scientists, in a small term say he's full of shit, that's nonsense. That's not a good thing to do. Not to people that are protecting this country.
It's interesting you would say that, because the same scientists that said the Navy's material is full of shit, they're saying my material is full of shit. Wait a minute. We're in the same boat.
It's unfortunate, and for you have a lot of research. You have a lot of history. Let's dive into some of your history and what you've discovered over the years.
Well, initially, all of this started for me when I was a child. And people do not want to believe that alien visitations do happen or have ever happened, and they do. I am the product of an alien visitation.
Well, before you jump into that, let me give you a little bit of support. We now know there's something undoubtedly there's UFOs in our airspace. No question. We now know that. But if you're willing to accept that there's UFOs in the airspace, and you have to be willing to accept the fact that we're under study, and also accept the fact that we are part of that study. And for visitations, it's an absolution, because you, Dr. Wilbur, and other people that have visited are part of that study. They're not going to be able to study us unless they have specimens to study indirectly. You can't, we've learned in nature, we can observe plenty. But if we have cameras trained on the animals that we have on National Geographic, that's one thing. To learn their biology, we need to take them into our labs. So
exactly. And that's the one thing that few people even consider when they're looking at my research. For example, I had mentioned just a few seconds ago that I was visited as a child by extraterrestrials. How do I explain how all the samples I have, and all the samples I have are exceeding that which is of NASA, exceeds that which is of the United States Navy, exceeds anything at the Pentagon. I've got these samples, and I've got these samples always in the same region of space. How is that possible?
It's not. And I'll tell you one thing. I've after our first time at speaking, I read more about you and watched some of your previous interviews. You're steadfast. You've not altered yourself at all. So
I'm not going to sit here and lie to you.
Right. And
a lie is the hardest thing to maintain.
Of course, because it never stays the same. Because you could, if you lie about something, what happens is you screw up something. Unless you write it down and read it every day, which no one's going to do, you're going to miss details. But you and people like Bob Lazar, people like David Fravor, and other people that spoken what they've witnessed, you've not changed a detail. Not one.
None at all. Not at all. It's all based on the material and understanding. I've got over 9,000 samples of these so-called camera glitches that Dr. Tyson says does not exist. But with the 9,000 examples that I have, each one of them is 4K high definition. There's no reason to say that there is no clarity, there's no definition associated to any of the samples I presented. That is not indeed the case.
Right.
The problem, again, becomes the person's ability to accept the data that's presented to them. And a lot of people do not want to believe the realities of an extraterrestrial incursion into any airspace.
Huh. That sounds like pride. You know what I mean? I've said this before too. That sounds like there's something moving around our airspace. We don't know what it is. And that's our government saying, well, I don't want to admit to that. That's a loss, right?
Well, you have people like, I'll put material up on my YouTube channel, and there are people who will make a comment, and in their comment, they will definitively define what it is exactly I filmed. Right. But here's the problem. The people that make these comments, when you go to their page, there's nothing there to indicate they're experts in this field at all.
Right.
So it becomes conjecture.
Well,
biased.
Keep in mind too, Al. Well, where if you go to the South America and you bring your smartphone, and we're finding these tribes that they don't know what the outside world is, right? You hand them a cell phone, their head's gonna explode. You know what I mean? It's so much for them to comprehend at once. So people that go to your channel and they see your videos, you have great evidence, but to them, they can't comprehend that. It's too much. It's an overload, and they have to explain it away with either nonsense or their belief system. And either one's bad, because if it's nonsense, they're going to basically say, well, he's full of shit. And if it's their belief system, well, it's the devil. And that's all there is to it. You know, I mean,
wait a minute. They're making statements that are definitive, but do not have the knowledge to support that statement that they make. Therefore, it becomes a problem because it is then conjecture. It is an opinion. And those opinions that these people have, and they're not scientifically trained, they want to believe it. And if you're not scientifically trained to do spatial scanning or anything like that, what makes you think you can assess my data and tell me exactly what it is I'm photographing?
That's a good point. That circles back to me when I'm sitting down with somebody. I can't argue about the photo I'm seeing. I don't have the expertise, but I know that the David Fravor, what he saw, and I know what he's saying is for real. He's a trained observer. That's his job. I'm not going to call him into question.
No, not at all. Not at all. But again, we're dealing with people, for example, and I got to keep mentioning these people. The people that say to me that they can see satellites. Now, wait a minute. If you can't see a car 5 miles away, what makes you think you can see that car 350 miles away?
Right, especially in daylight.
Exactly. And there are people that say, oh, I see satellites. No, you do not. It's a physical impossibility. Not unless that satellite is as big as New York City, you're not going to see it in orbit.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I've had someone, you know this about me. I've never witnessed anything, not yet anyway. I intend to because I'm going to be a little aggressive when I get in the field. But I've had people express to me that that some of the things that people are seeing in these videos that are moving in the night sky are satellites. And I'm like, well, how do you explain them when they're moving in different directions? Satellites go in one direction. They're in orbit. They don't change directions, right? And they're referencing that. You remember there's a video, and I said this, I think even to you, where it's from space, and you see this object moving, and then it takes a sharp 30-degree turn a different direction, and something fires up in its direction. I have yet to have anyone try to explain that to me rationally.
No, but there are people that are saying that's ice crystals. And then there are people that say, and this is really, really troublesome for me, and it bothers me a lot. But, the range of human visibility, especially as a human, at best, for you to see with definition, the farthest you can see is 1 mile.
Right.
With definition. Beyond that, we can't really see or say anything. The person that says to me that they can see satellites should be able to see the tail number of an aircraft at 40,000 feet, but they can't do that.
It's true. And, this isn't a world where people are in their phones a lot. Like our ability to look further away with definition is declining. We spend a lot of screen time with our eyes. I mean, I don't, it's tough. Because, again, referencing that video where there's something moving in space, it hits the brakes, goes a different direction. A split second later, something fires almost exactly where it was. And they're saying these are ice crystals? I don't know, man.
That footage was taken by Dr. Story Musgrave. He was a shuttle commander when that footage was filmed.
Yeah.
So Story's a good friend of mine. And it's interesting. The astronauts I show my materials to confirm it. They confirm the data. Without a doubt, that those are the exact same objects they encountered in space. But to a person who has never encountered that and has the opinion that these objects should look like something from Star Wars, that's a completely different narrative.
Yeah, like Buzz Aldrin, not directly, but he has mentioned undoubtedly something else is out there. Undoubtedly something's moving in space, and these are our astronauts. These are people that we send to space, again, trained observers to do a specific job cleared by our government. And they're saying that there's things out there. I mean, come on. When do we get to the point where I'll tell you, we get to that point when people stop wearing protective eyewear, meaning they're blocking what they don't want to know. They're walking around in this mindset of, I know this, and this is what my good book has told me. You know what I mean? They're not willing to accept new. I'm not sure what to believe. I'm reading it now.
The problem is not new. They're not sure to accept that which is unknown. Something that's unknown.
Right.
And it's written in the Bible, for example, the things that are unseen, and the unseen is anything that is beyond the range of human visibility. And basically, the samples that I presented are all within the realm of the unseen. So if they're unseen, and I did an experiment in which I had several cameras running at the same time, focused at the same region of space. And the cameras that weren't infrared saw absolutely nothing, while the camera that is infrared sees a bright red luminous object. So we know that they're there. So I did the experimentation associated to that. For a person to tell me that they see the same thing in space is an impossibility.
Yeah, I'm gonna attach some of your videos to the podcast so people could view it.
Please.
Because I'm in support of that. So,
Please.
because I'll tell you, I don't know. I did bring her up to you last time, Cheryl Costa.
Yes.
I got to connect you guys. There's a few people I need to connect. I'm going to tell you what I think. I watched a lot of these documentaries on UFOs. I watched a lot of these shows in the last year and a half to get familiar more with the mainstream idea. And I just have a hard time swallowing that pill. I would watch a show with you, Cheryl Costa, and a handful of other people in a heartbeat. Because unlike these TV shows where they're doing it for that shock and awe and they need ratings, you guys are out there for that data. You're driven by the facts. You're driven to release what's unknown to make it known. That's your goal, is to collect data. And I find that more appealing than some guy pointing cameras in the middle of the desert and they're like, that may or may not have been. And you know how shows are like, well, what our experts say this. It's not good enough. It's a
That's
waste of
the
time.
problem. The experts. What exactly do the experts know? And are the experts at the same level of technology as I am, which they're not?
That's a great
So
question.
there, I have to be dismissive of most of these comments and statements made by these people.
Well,
the fact that they're basically speaking out of their ass.
It's true. Like they always say, well, who are these experts? Like I heard of one show say our theorists say yes. They always say yes. Well, who are these theorists? Why are they not being interviewed? You know what I mean? So I would watch a show with you and Cheryl Costa and some of the other people I'm going to mention. I think you guys would, if you had the right resources, I think you guys uncover facts within a year or two, beyond what you've already done, beyond what the expectation are. I think in a year or two with the right resources, you guys do great things as a team, personally. And
that is indeed the case, but keeping in mind that which I do is the product of the technology that I created. And I knew without a doubt that what I was making does not exist.
right.
Basically, as I mentioned earlier, I took existing technology, and that existing technology is NASA Hubble, and I gave it a substantial amount of steroids. I turned NASA Hubble into a motion picture application. And in a motion picture application, the technology works in real time. Most people don't realize that a NASA Hubble photograph can take as long as 30 days to render one. And when you look at that one image, you can tell immediately that it was an extended duration photograph, or the fact that the stars are all lens flares. Now, that's an impossibility. If you go into space, don't expect to see what the NASA Hubble imagery looks like by your own eye standards, because that's impossible.
Right.
It's not going to happen.
You know, I recently interviewed Rick Warner, and I think I'm definitely going to connect you with him. If when you get the opportunity, listen to the episode I did with Rick Warner. It's just a few episodes ago, and he's got a team he's put together too, and that's his team. You, Cheryl Cott. I have this vision of you guys going out there and doing the research and coming with great evidence, especially with you. You're an inventive person, right? And so to what you said earlier about, your invention's not out there yet, so it doesn't exist. Well, that's how all great inventions started. You know what I mean? In a very powerful minded person, someone imaginative that would say, let me take these things that exist now and make them better. If we didn't do that, we would still have, regular TVs. There would be no flat screens. There would be no phones. So for what you're doing, you're evolving this subject matter, right? You're taking it to that next level. I think that's a great thing. So, but real quick, Dr. Rob, I'm reading this now. So in your years of study and things you've learned, what seems to be the cases that trouble you the most?
Well, and I have to admit, I'm not versed with all the other data that's out there. I can only speak upon that which I accumulate.
Right.
And in some of the samples that I've accumulated, there is one in particular in which a spherical object breaks into 9 pieces, then reformats itself and continues to fly forward. And I've got that on film, and I filmed it in high speed. So it showed without a doubt this thing fragment, then reformat itself. And it did that several times in the course of flying in a forwards trajectory. To me, it was indicative of what some people were saying, where they've had events where they've witnessed a UFO come out of another UFO, come out of another UFO within itself. And it indicated without a doubt that these things can exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously.
Huh. Well, I mean, again, if you consider how they behave in our airspace, and it's definitely not by the physics we play by, you have to make room for the idea that they're definitely either they're altering space-time or they're going through dimensions in real time.
Exactly. And the data indicates without a doubt that they're dimensional and altering space-time simultaneously.
Right. Because if some of these like perception for humans is strange, because David Fravor, for example, not to beat it up, but that object went from where he was to their cap point, which now makes me wonder, did it get there ahead of them, or was it there always, right? Because they're
moving at warp velocity. That's the other thing. When this sample that I mentioned, where it fragmented into 9 different pieces, it did so quickly that if I had not been running this camera at 60 frames per second, I would not have seen that.
Yeah, that's true, because that's perception. Our eyes can only handle so much, and even then, our eyes are seeing a delayed image of what the brain's trying to reconstruct.
Right. And then at some point, if the brain does not want to accept what it sees, it will block it out and you won't actually see it at all.
Right. That's, I hear that. That's true, because if you're walking around your house, I read this study. If you're walking around your house, your brain remembers the house and the structure of your house. So you might not be seeing things in real time. It's just recreating it because we know that's there. It's not till something different is there is when they have to reconstruct it, and you get more of a hyper focus on a specific part of the home. And with observations that you're making, yes, sophisticated equipment is needed, because we're not going to be able to perceive what people are talking about.
Not at all, but they're beyond the range of visibility, so that we have to consider it because of the limitations of our own eyes, that the unseen does indeed exist, and that we're dealing with events and objects that are well beyond the ranges of visibility. If they're beyond the ranges of visibility, that means they're invisible.
Right.
And we can't see them. That doesn't mean they're not there.
In your opinion, what do you think our visitors are here for?
Unknown.
Yeah.
Unknown.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm forming an opinion, we're definitely we're a study, right?
We're a study.
And entertainment.
Indeed, but outside of that, it's unknown.
Right. And I don't think our government, people like to say the government have an idea why they're here, but I don't think they do.
The government has no idea. You could see that in their redacted materials that they release to the public. And notice I used the word redacted.
Yeah.
Most of the stuff that they put out, all you got was blocks of paper with black blocks all over it. They redacted all of that information. And they try to make it like it's national security type material. But the fact of the matter is, it was just well beyond their thoughts and capability of reasoning.
Yeah, they say that a lot, right? That's like the default.
It's an excuse. It's an excuse.
Yeah, because let's be honest, man. If they were going to attack, I think they would have did it a long time ago.
They would have done that a long time ago. And if they do attack, they would kick our asses immediately. It's not like, it bothers me. They got a space force. And I'm going to sit here and tell you, I've got samples of spacecraft that are at least 1,000 miles long. Do you think a man-made spacecraft, what kind of damage would you be able to do with a spacecraft that's 1,000 miles long?
There's no shot. You do nothing.
There we go. Just sit there and be quiet.
I mean, let's be honest. If they were going to attack, here's the other big thing. Would we even knew it happened? No, I don't think so.
No, they would withhold that information. They would rather the aliens take over than for you to know that they've landed.
Well, not even that, but if the aliens wanted to take over Earth, I don't think it'd be like War of the Worlds where this big battle takes place. They would just render us unconscious, right? They have that. They've proven its ability over the course of time.
Exactly.
So I don't think this would be like some sort of like drawn out battle where there's fire that we're shooting at them or getting jets out there. I think we just go to sleep one day and that's that.
Well, I've got to say that there's something indeed unusual about these objects and their ability to wipe a mind clean.
Yeah.
I had an encounter in Baltimore in 2008. I was with 18 people when these objects landed in front of me, and I took photographs, and the people were there, all witnessed the objects land. But when I asked them today what they recall, they don't recall any of it.
Yeah. Here's like a pattern I'm finding. There's a number of people I'd spoken to about their encounters. And it would seem to me like, here, let me get this guy's name for you. There's for you, with your encounters, you knew was happening in real time, right? Pete Whitley from MUFON, he had some encounters. Same thing. He said that the entity seemed surprised that he was aware of them. And so when there's people like you and Pete and some of the other people I'd spoken to about, they try to render me out unconscious. Perhaps,
basically saying the same things. Does that sound coincidental?
yeah. And so you and a few other people, or probably a lot of other people, have the software that bypasses what they're doing to render you unconscious.
Exactly.
Which makes you more interesting to them. Why do you get revisited? Well, this is interesting. This subject here, not only did it not, fall under whatever we're utilizing against him, but he was aware of us. He perceived us. And for him to perceive us, we need to know how that works. And we need to monitor him long term.
Exactly.
So I would. And look, sometimes for you, for an example, there would probably be a decade where you don't have another encounter because that's observation period. And to them, what is time to them?
But it's kind of interesting for the time that I have been doing this research, that these events have been nightly.
Huh.
What is the probability of that? And even more abstract is when I set up my telescopes. I align my telescopes specifically north, south, east, west, and they're exactly aligned. How is it that I get the same objects in the same regions of space on a nightly basis, and nobody else does?
Yeah, you're in tune, right? You have software. I say this a lot in this podcast, Wilbur. I say it a lot. We all have the same hardware. Our brains are pretty identical as far as construction goes. But like any other computer you buy, like if you buy a PC and I buy a PC and you gear yours towards gaming and I gear mine towards, just something work related for like PowerPoints, they're going to have different software. They're going to have different abilities and different perception. You have a different software.
Yes.
And I think, Pete Whitley has different software. I think a lot of these people have different software. I think psychics have different software. I think people look at psychics, and I say this a lot. They're like, oh, they're supernatural. It's, you're talking nonsense. They have different software. I talk to homicide cops a lot, and they don't say they're psychic, but they have this gut feeling or have this instinct. You have some software that other people don't have. That's how you're catching all these killers and catching these criminals, because you have an upload or a download that none of us got.
It also becomes a problem when you start to deal with people again that the mindset, and the mind is a very interesting computer. The mind can block things out for you and cause you not to remember certain things, like the 18 people I mentioned that were with me when I had this close encounter in Baltimore in 2008.
Right.
So I know that for a fact, but something in that encounter wiped their memory clean. And I would assume that whatever it was that wiped those people's memories clean was emitted from the orange objects that landed in front of me.
Agreed.
But it didn't wipe my brain clean. It was very interesting.
You have a different software, man. I think that's why I say if I think they were ever going to attack, if that's the word to use, or they were going to take over, whatever it was, I don't think it would be a battle. I think they would render us unconscious, or they would redirect or reprogram our computers, our brain.
Exactly.
I don't even think we would know what happened, to be honest. Which is, there's an interesting theory that we're already living in a simulation. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting that I'm seeing recurring events that it's unnaturally recurring. Unnaturally meaning, for example, I had an event 8/13/2013, then it happened again 8/14/2014, and then 8/15/2015. So we're looking at events that repeated 365 days apart. And what was interesting is, and again, I mentioned that when I set up my technology, I align my telescopes in such a manner that they're all precisely aligned, that when I took the samples from each one of those years, each one of those objects was along the exact same trajectory.
Huh. That sounds like computer programming.
But it showed without a doubt that there's glitches in reality.
Right.
And that glitch was, here's this very same event taking place each year, 365 days apart.
What
at the same time?
Did you know what day of the week that was on?
I can easily look that up based on the time code references that are on each of the samples.
Right. I would be curious to know if it fell upon the same date or the same day of week.
That's what I'm saying. It's 8/13/2013,
Right.
8/14/2014, and 8/15/2015. Those are each 365 days apart.
That's right. That's That's really interesting. That's really interesting. So reoccurrences and patterns, and yeah, that's the hallmarks of a computer program.
Nobody accepted that data.
That's bizarre. Why would they disregard that?
They disregarded it. Even more bizarre are the reports that I'm getting that would say that some of these objects are silent, which in most cases they are. But the samples I got in P53 restricted airspace in Washington, D.C. emitted mechanical sounds. And those mechanical sounds are unlike anything I've ever heard before.
I find that most of them, that when they're, so here's what I've found so far, and some of the small research I've done, right? And I do a lot of off podcast interviews just to get people's ideas and the data, collected from the masses anyway. And so far, the ones that are hovering or holding still to one spot emit some sort of like humming noise, which makes sense to me because you're manipulating a frequency and a vibration to stay isolated to one spot. Whereas the ones that are moving through the air rapidly are virtually silent, because now you're manipulating space-time, or if you're even teleporting at said point, you're not, because how do you explain these things moving through the air? And every time we see them, whether it be the pilots that saw them, people on the ground, not one time you hear anyone say anything about a sonic boom.
That's what's interesting. I've got samples, and these objects are moving at warp velocity.
Right.
And it's an impossibility for a man-made aircraft to move at that velocity and not make a noise, and that noise would be the sonic boom.
Right.
And these objects would warp by silently.
And so the objects you see on the instruments from the Navy pilots, you don't hear them mentioning like they're disrupting the airspace. You don't, and the images you see, you don't see them. Like if you see another jet, you see air coming off of it, right? You can see it disrupting the air. It thickens. I don't see any evidence of that in the videos, and I'm not an expert, so I don't know. And
it's field production, it's field propulsion, and whatever these objects are, they put themselves within this envelope of energy, and that envelope of energy seems to offset the after effects of this environment in which an object which is moving at warp velocity would leave a sonic boom. And in this case, and most of the cases that I'm getting with these objects that I photograph, they're all moving at the same velocity, because I can tell the velocities based on an overlay, which I take the samples and I overlay them, and I can tell from the time it takes to go from one side of the image to another that they're moving at the exact same velocity. But if that is indeed the case, then all of the samples I have with these objects moving at extreme speeds, they're moving in such a manner that it just is devoid for anyone humanly possibly, to hear them cut through our airspace.
Right.
Impossible.
Because even like with David Fravor, when they were circling one another, when he first when he dove down to observe the object, he said it behaved like it knew he was there, like they were engaged.
They knew it. They were, in fact, their minds were being scanned by these objects. And it was interesting that I would say that, for the fact that I had an encounter in Area 51 in which an object telepathically commanded me to leave the area. And as it was telling me to leave the area, there was a security vehicle from Area 51 with guys with machine guns and a machine gun turret mounted on the top of this Jeep, coming to the area in which I was taking pictures. But the aliens warned me to get out of there telepathically.
Yeah, that's not impossible, by the way. I mean, keep in mind, when you look at the human brain under imaging, like MRI or CT with contrast, you could see that the brain has receptors in it. No question about it. And a sophisticated technology could very easily utilize those receptors to convey a message. We're working on that now. We have been working on that. We know in shows like Future Weapons and other, like everything we use for military application, we could use sound, vibrations, and frequency to harm somebody, and we could use it to convey information. So I don't not subscribe to that. I think that's very feasible, and I think in the next decade we're going to have something near and around that. With the introduction
we should, but then we're dealing with people who, for example, and I've got to mention these folks also. They're the ones that say they had these encounters, but they've got nothing to show that substantiates the claim.
Right.
I've told you I was taken and visited by extraterrestrials as a child. That is the only explanation I can give to an individual as to how and why I'm able to get these objects I get with consistency and frequency, because of that encounter.
Right.
But for a person to say to me that they were taken by extraterrestrials, but yet they have nothing to show for it, to me indicates that they made it up.
I get it. I have to agree there. I'll tell you why. I think a lot of people were, if I'm an alien species, I'm really advanced and I want to go out there and study my subjects. One, me personally, I think I've told you this before. I think the small gray aliens are an advanced biological robot with a consciousness upload, avatar. And I think the taller ones are the biological ones. And which is why you see them always like in this, people describe them a lot as being.
I have to agree. What they've seen, the little grays, is what I saw when I was a child. But along with the little grays was a much taller one that looked exactly like them.
Right.
The little grays I saw were maybe 3 to 4 feet tall, but the taller one was maybe 6, 7, maybe 8 feet tall. But it looked exactly like the small ones.
Right.
But at a larger proportion. It seemed to be the leader.
And so I hear people often tell me that they see him coming through walls. Well, it could be a very advanced projection. Like I don't know if you noticed, but I saw a concert years ago where Tupac was on stage, and that guy's been dead a while. We did that with projections.
3D holograms to do
right.
That.
So and again, so the air here is unbreathable for them, or the atmosphere might be damaging to them. So a projection makes sense. It's when you see, and I hear this a lot too, when people are taking aboard whatever craft that might be, and the big speculation right now is that it's just outside of our moon where they have a mother station. It would make sense. It's unperceivable. But when they are away and they're on a craft is when they see them in their physical form, right? Because it's in their element. So circling back to the idea that their little grays are down there, they're doing the field research, and they come across you, and they're like, wait a minute, hey, did you do something to this dude to put him out? Because he's looking right at us. You became a rare specimen at that point.
It became interesting because they started visiting me nightly. It was even more abstract at a base called McGuire Air Force Base, where I had mentioned to the kids in my third grade class that this alien was visiting me nightly. And they separated me from the rest of the children and put me in special needs because I said that.
Yeah.
But 3-4 years later, they killed an extraterrestrial at McGuire Air Force Base.
I'd have to read about that. I never even heard of that.
Read up alien killed at McGuire Air Force Base. And what they described was the exact same object entity that was visiting me when I was a kid.
Huh. So, again, to put in perspective, I think a lot of people get visited, have zero idea it happened. But like you said, the ones that say they were and they have nothing to show for it, I guess you can call out a question a little bit, because they would have to be more along the lines of you and a lot of these, like Pete Whitley and these other people, where they have that software and they can recall a lot.
Yes.
And they happen to know where, like Pete Whitley, where he's in Japan now with MUFON, right? And a lot of people like him around there, and they're investigating and they're finding tangible evidence, and it's all being disregarded, which I think is going to change really soon. I think the government and the world and some of these non-believers, like these people that are, in their religious belief system, or some of them are just atheists, they're going to be confronted with something very soon.
There are some that put out misinformation, and I've got, I don't know, and I'm not going to name this person, but they were supposedly filming spacecraft around the sun with their iPhone. Now, wait a minute.
How the hell were they doing that?
Does that sound physically possible? I'm using solar technology, and my solar application, I can get pretty damn close to the sun. But I wasn't getting nothing like what this young lady was getting with her iPhone.
How the hell would she do that?
That is questionable, because you have to understand, most people and their cell phones, a cell phone is a personal application. It does not have the ability to look into space at all.
I mean, I know people have iPhones that are brand new and they do to zoom in to go look at an animal here in Florida, and it's still not the best of quality. So to look at the sun.
Not at all. But for them to say that, for a person to say that they were getting objects around the sun with an iPhone is as preposterous as, using a regular lens to do it, because it's a physical impossibility just by the definitions associated to the device that they're utilizing. So why are they coming out and saying that they're doing these things? The realities are it's a physical impossibility. And even more abstract, the people that they're presenting this information to believe it.
I don't know, man. I got to tell you, like I very recently had a Canon video camera, really high-end 4K Canon video camera. And I was trying to zoom in on the moon one night because I thought it was really big in the sky, right? And it wasn't great. Like when I saw the people doing on YouTube, it wasn't until later on I realized that they were using telescopes and attaching cameras to it.
Yes.
But I was really disappointed. And so to hear someone use an iPhone that's not even near with this Canon camera, this is a $2,000 camera.
It's got a 3mm lens on it. Come on, now, what do you think you're going to see in space with a 3mm lens?
Honestly, because here I am with a $2,000 camera of 4K qualities and a great zoom, and I'm not even getting quality images of the moon really. And they're going to look at the sun.
I've created these lenses I'm using. I've got a 933.3mm f2 lens, which is an impossibility. And if it did exist, it'd be $200,000 or $300,000.
Right.
But even with that lens, I'm not getting the stuff that these people are getting with their iPhones.
Yeah, that's a big problem, Dr. Allen. You're seeing more and more of that. It's on YouTube where people are, if you want to call it entertainment, please call it entertainment, but don't pass it as real, because it takes people like you, Cheryl, and most of these other people that are doing real investigative work and lopping you in the same category as a guy who's filming blah 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 with his camera and getting horseshit.
That's the problem. It makes what I do difficult to substantiate when you've got a bunch of people with low grade technology getting things that are physically impossible. How do I explain that? And
right.
My systems are not getting those things. It even becomes harder to explain when you have people that are adamant about what they're getting with their cell phone. And they actually believe that the cell phone is a scientific instrument, which it is not.
No, it's definitely not recognized unless you're in law enforcement, you're trying to get a sting operation. And even then, you could bring that to court and that video is somewhat questionable, throw it out.
It's inadmissible evidence because, first of all, a real camera puts metadata on each video that it's recorded on specific technology that's being used. So with that in mind, a cell phone does not have that capability. Secondly, a cell phone doesn't have the memory to parse a large-scale 4K application like what I am able to generate with the systems that I have. It's impossible for that to happen with a cell phone. But yet we're dealing with people that, regardless of the fact that the technology that they're using is inferior, they want to believe that the samples that they're getting are legitimate, and they're not legitimate.
No, and it's disappointing because, even for the paranormal guys, I'm pretty good about finding horseshit in videos, right? I saw one video where they're in a hotel and they're showing it. She goes in the closet, everything's neatly stacked. She turns away, shows the other closet, and then she circles back to the original closet. But there's that 2 seconds where it's the camera staring into the dark where I caught an edit. And then the closet's in disarray. And not that it's an interesting video. It's spooky, but call it
faked. It's faked. It's faked.
Right,
it's
but
faked.
Call it entertainment. There's no harm. People are going to watch it. We want to be entertained, but it's unfair for you to call that investigative research when it's not. And then there's people like you that are doing real research, and it's why the government behaves the way we saw in the news the other day. They're dismissive of it. Like did you hear the question? He's like, he goes, "Is it true that you're a science fiction fan?" Right in the middle of this congressional hearing. I'm like, what the hell does that matter if he's a professional presenting
what they're
evidence?
doing is trying to discredit that person and saying that what they're getting is the product of a vivid imagination.
Right.
But you see, I can't make that claim because my cameras have nothing to do with me. My cameras are recording space at a much higher level of sensitivity than any human could possibly imagine. They don't ever consider that, but the data is not recognized as it should be.
I'll tell you where I called nonsense too when they said, we're going to start, communicating with FAA and they're naming acronyms. I'm like, wait, you're going to start? This phenomenon has been around a very long, predating flight. It's been around.
Yes.
Predating religion. It's been around. And you're going to start communicating with them? What?
Yeah.
Stop it. They've been in contact.
That's the whole problem. There's a disconnect there. And when you start getting data and you try to present it, and the people you present it to in the government want to threaten you for it.
Yeah.
And they don't want you to show it to this person or that person. It becomes not worth the time.
Yeah, that guy, Scott Bray, the naval intelligence guy, he was submitting some information, but I could tell at the same time he was submitting it to acknowledge it, you could absolutely tell he was downplaying it. It was so obvious. And to the aggravation of two of the guys that were asking the questions in the Congress, out of, which is another weird thing. That was not a very full place for such important information to national security. Not a lot of presence
there. People
there.
in there that were clueless doing this investigation, and those congressmen are clueless.
Right.
So, when you get clueless people doing research that's way beyond them, it was odd that they never responded to my hails, and I've got the samples that would have made that hearing just snap, but they didn't use my stuff.
Well, that guy, Scott Bray, right? Mr. Scott Bray. I love how they use these titles for a national. I mean, this guy is supposed to be the intelligence director for the Navy, and they're calling him Mr. Scott Bray as opposed to some. Anyway, the point I make is he gave me that Richard Doty kind of feeling. You know what I mean? Like he seemed very like he would give information, but he would circle the information different directions, and to the frustration.
His job to mislead and to be
right.
convolute the information, and they do that. They do that.
Yeah.
It's again, we're dealing with a mindset, and the mindset is just not conducive for the realities that are being presented to them. No matter how good the data is, you could lead the horse to the water, and you can't make them drink.
Right. And then, look, again, I'm not a conspiracy person I'm ever, but when I see deception, I call on it. And
exactly.
And as I'm watching this too, like I've referenced this with Chris DePerno last night. There's a show called The Blacklist, and it's one of my favorite shows, right? And Raymond Reddington, when you ask him a question, he diverts the question to a different direction without answering the question. And that's exactly what they did.
Exactly. It's like, you pass the Ducci to the left hand. It's like passing the buck, and they pass the buck to the point where it goes to a person that's completely not qualified to even assess that, and they leave it at that. Yeah. And that's where the data stops.
And you could see in the face of that guy, Mr. Gallagher, who was asking the questions, you could see frustration because he wanted answers and he didn't want to hear, we'll do this in the closed session.
Well, he's not going to get that from a bunch of congressmen or some people that are making these contrary claims, and they don't have the facts to support anything that they've said or anything that they've done to even make them a person that would be an authoritarian in that field. But yet they become the authoritarians.
It's crazy.
They become the last word, and the last word is always disbelief.
I got it. So moving forward, now let's talk about where you want to go. And if you had all the resources, what direction you want to go in, and what would you want to look for?
Well, at this juncture of the game, what I need to do is basically, from the technology that I've created, is to create a much more elaborate array with the same level of technology and create a device that will give me a wide sweep in space, multiple camera views, and use that technology to gather information.
I think the problem you would run into is it would be so sophisticated that the U.S. government would be like, listen, man, we can't have you.
I'm already at that point. It's way beyond them. I mean, I've got NASA on my page. I'm being followed by U.S. Navy operations, and they're using my data as the basis of study. But the fact of the matter is, they're using that data because of the fact that it is superior to anything they could possibly generate.
And you have, so your channel, so your YouTube channel, which I'm going to link in description, and I'm going to play some of the videos in the actual podcast.
Please do.
I want to circle people to that because I spent a lot of time looking at it. Again, like I told you, I'm pretty good at looking at video and saying, I don't know about that, but I haven't come across that.
Explain how I'm able to present that much data and it's all consistent. Right. Even more interesting is that it's uniform quality. There's not one video up there that's of a low quality or, like the crap that they're using right now on television. It's not like that at all. All my data is high definition.
Yeah. And that's what's important too. And you put the work into it, a lot of it.
Yes.
So that's why I really personally, again, if I to show networks out there that want to make a good show that's going to, track what this phenomenon is.
They want the material. I've got the data, but they've got to be able to accept the fact of the matter. And here I'm showing you the exact same things as the USS Nimitz material in high definition and in full color. They weren't anticipating that or expecting that at all, but yet they're using this data from the USS Nimitz as basis of research.
I don't know. It's a bias, no doubt about it. I think.
Oh yeah, it's selective. It's very selective.
Yeah.
Very selective.
Well, you're not sworn in, and because you're not sworn in, there's no ramifications for your data to get out there, right? They're not going to punish you for
Not
it.
at all. I was a military contractor, but that doesn't mean I was in the military.
Right.
The contractor is completely different. I don't adhere to the chain of command.
Like, you know, to like Lou Elizondo, I could see frustration on him too. I know he wants to say more to what he's saying. I could tell he does, but he, you know,
But he doesn't have the data to do that. That's my point. It would be different if he had the like flow of content that I have, but they don't have that. What they've got is what they've got, and what they have is not bad, but it's not definitive.
It's true. I mean, you know, I got a group of people I got to introduce you to. You guys have large investments with great ideas, very inventive. You know, I gotta put you in that circle of people. It's got to happen. I mean, I would watch your show in a heartbeat. I don't know.
Yeah, no question. No question.
I don't know why people aren't jumping more about it. So before we close, let's discuss on closing some of the cases you came across where your findings were good, but there were some negative outcomes.
I did Uncovering Aliens for BBC Discovery, which aired in 2013, and they sent me to Area 51 in Sedona, Arizona. And I was getting samples in Sedona, Arizona, of these streaks of light that would materialize into the airspace and fly through as the camera's filming. And I got people that were telling me that what I was getting were aircraft filmed under extended duration exposures. But there's a problem with that because I'm filming 60 frames per second when I'm filming in nighttime, and especially when I'm doing spatial research in abstract locations. So it is impossible for an extended duration photograph to be taken at 60 frames per second. Impossible.
Right.
The minimal shutter speed at 60 frames per second is 1/60th of a second. So we know that that's not an extended photograph. But the people would still indicate that these streaks of light were the product of aircraft that were being taken with a low grade exposure, and they would streak through the skies. But again, wait a minute, aircraft have navigation lights, and there would be more than one streak. Why is there only one streak in the sample?
Right.
Does that make sense?
No, not at all.
It's contrary to what a person's belief is. Again, the problems were associated to what a person believed these UFO and spatial anomalies were supposed to look like. Most of the people that made those claims are the same people that are Star Wars buffs or, Close Encounters buffs. But the data was just not consistent with what Hollywood presented, and they want to make what Hollywood presented as a reality, when the fact is that what Hollywood presented is make-believe.
Right. Right. You know, that's true about what you said earlier. Like when people are seeing the Hubble images from space, I don't think people are aware that those images are not saying manipulated, but they're enhanced by NASA before released to the public.
They're manipulated.
Right.
As I mentioned, NASA Hubble was created in 1977. In 1977, ISO 1600 was the maximum sensitivity in film and in camera technology. At 1600 ISO, you're not going to see anything in space, technically speaking, not even stars.
Right.
So what they don't realize is when you look at a NASA Hubble image and you see the images and you see the stars in the background are all lens flares. They're lens flares because that photograph took 30 days to take.
Yeah. Yep. And it's a delayed image, and there's a lot of artifact.
Exactly. It's basically a ruse in a sense. It's misleading information. And that's why I say if you go into space and you think you're going to see what the NASA Hubble photographed in space with your own eyes, don't expect it. You're not going to see that.
You know what I'm going to do, Dr. Allen? I'm going to have you on the show again, and what we'll do together is we'll have you compile as many videos as you've taken over time, and we'll put it on the podcast so people can see it live as you're discussing it, and we'll go through your material. Yes,
I can do that.
I think that would be a great presentation. I think that would really move things for you. I personally think that. So
absolutely.
In the meantime, I'm going to say goodnight to everyone. I'm going to talk to you in post, so don't go anywhere. Everyone listening, thank you for listening. Good day, good night, good evening, wherever you are. And Dr. Allen, it's always a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Not a problem. We'll talk soon.
Bye.